Admiral Gortek adjusted his ceremonial sash and suppressed a snort as he gazed out at the assembled dignitaries. 5 years. 5 years since the NIGMA Empire, once the most feared military force in 3 galactic quadrants, had been reduced to nothing but a cautionary tale and a few scattered refugees. "Welcome, esteemed representatives of the Galactic Confederation," he began, his 4 mandibles clicking in what his species recognized as barely contained amusement. "We gather today to commemorate what historians are now calling the inevitable folly of exceptional arrogance. Or, as I like to call it, what happens when you don't listen to people who know better." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the grand hall. Most species present had supported the humans in the conflict, but nobody had expected the total annihilation of an empire that had stood for 12,000 years. Gortek tapped the holoprojector, and an image of the former NIGMA homeworld appeared, now a broken, fractured sphere being slowly reclaimed by its own natural forces. "The NIGMA Empire," he continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "believed themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution. Their biomechanical technology was unmatched, their fleets numbered in the millions. Their emperor, the glorious Dre's Core, once told me personally that his civilization would outlast the stars themselves." Gortek paused for effect. He was off by about 11 billion years, give or take. More laughter, less uncomfortable this time. For those too young to remember, or those who conveniently erased the data from their memory banks, he glanced pointedly at the synthetic representatives. The NIGMA were aggressive expansionists. They viewed the galaxy as their birthright, and the rest of us as either servants or obstacles. They conquered 37 civilizations before encountering humans. 37 successful campaigns made them overconfident. Gortek sipped from his hydration pod and flicked through several more images. NIGMA battle cruisers, their distinctive crescent shape once a symbol of terror. NIGMA ground forces, with their gleaming purple armor and energy pikes. Emperor Dre's Core himself, 9 feet tall, with luminescent skin that changed color with his emotional state. I served as diplomatic military liaison to the NIGMA for 20 years before their fall. I warned them. By the cosmic core, how I warned them. The first report I sent after human reconnaissance data came in was explicit. This species evolved on a planet that actively tried to kill them every day of their existence. Proceed with extreme caution. Gortek shook his head, mandibles spread wide in exasperation. "Do you know what Admiral Tuzar said when he read my report? He said, and I quote, 'How dangerous can a species be when they haven't even developed proper telepathic abilities? They still communicate by making sounds with their food holes.'" That's right. The NIGMA's top military strategist reduced humans to creatures that talk with their food holes. A hush fell over the room as the next image appeared. Earth, the deceptively beautiful blue-green world that had spawned humanity. The NIGMA saw a level 3 civilization with rudimentary space travel, internal political divisions, and a concerning addiction to audiovisual entertainment about improbable romantic pairings. What they failed to see was a species that had survived ice ages, meteor impacts, plagues, and their own nuclear weapons, a species that had killed off most of their planet's apex predators so efficiently that they had to create preservation zones to keep some of them around just for nostalgia. Gortek's voice rose in pitch, the universal translator struggling to convey his tone of incredulous mockery. The NIGMA thought they were going to conquer Earth. Instead, they became the galaxy's most expensive object lesson. And today we remember not just the billions who died when the Empire fell, but the absolute mind-boggling stupidity that led to their destruction. He looked directly at the human ambassador, Nadia Yassir, who sat in the front row with an expression that might be interpreted as polite interest or barely concealed pride, depending on one's perspective. Because when the NIGMA Empire looked at humans and saw easy prey, they forgot the first rule of galactic conquest: never, ever mess with a species that intentionally consumes substances that cause them pain for pleasure. Gortek tapped his control pad, and the holographic display shifted to footage from a NIGMA scout vessel. The date stamp indicated it was from 12 years ago. The first NIGMA scouts arrived in Earth's solar system with typical subtlety, Gortek continued, gesturing to the sleek, purple-hulled ship creeping past Neptune. And by typical subtlety, I mean they immediately started scanning everything while congratulating themselves on how sneaky they were being. The footage switched to a NIGMA command center, where a tall, gaunt officer with scalp ridges and piercing yellow eyes was reviewing data streams. This charming fellow was Captain Meklar. His first report back to NIGMA Command described Earth as, and I'm paraphrasing here, a backwards mud ball overflowing with exploitable resources and populated by barely spacefaring apes who spend most of their time watching cat videos. Gortek allowed himself a hearty chuckle. The captain wasn't entirely wrong about the cat videos, but his assessment of human technological capabilities. Let's just say Meklar wasn't promoted after the war, mostly because he was vaporized in the first counterattack, but still. The display switched to a grand chamber with soaring ceilings and bioluminescent decorations, the NIGMA High Command meeting hall. At its center stood Admiral Tuzar, his iridescent military coat gleaming under the lights, the tentacle-like appendages on his head writhing with excitement as he addressed his subordinates. Admiral Tuzar was practically giddy when the initial reports came in, Gortek narrated. Earth's oceans contained trace elements crucial for NIGMA biotech. Their atmosphere was compatible with NIGMA physiology. And most importantly, humans appeared to be what the Admiral called deliciously unprepared. The footage showed Tuzar pointing to a holographic display of Earth's military assets. Look at their primitive projectile weapons, Tuzar was saying, his voice translated for the audience. They still use combustion for propulsion. Their fastest ships would take years to reach their neighboring planets. And their military technology? He burst into a sound that the translator rendered as mocking laughter. They don't even have neural disruptors. How do they expect to fight without neural disruptors? Gortek paused the footage. For context. The NIGMA believed neural disruption technology was the pinnacle of weapons development. The fact that humans hadn't developed it wasn't because humans couldn't. It was because human nervous systems are wired differently. But try explaining neurodiversity to a species convinced of their own superiority. The display shifted to show a tall, willowy figure with crystalline features and flowing robes, Ambassador Laxna of the Confederation. Ambassador Laxna attempted to inject some common sense into the situation, Gortek said, his voice softening slightly. Laxna was one of the few who had studied human history extensively. The footage played, showing Laxna addressing the NIGMA Leadership Council. Honored members of the NIGMA Empire, Laxna began, her melodic voice somehow conveying urgency without raising its volume. I urge caution. Humans may appear technologically inferior, but they possess remarkable adaptability. The Zoraxian hegemony made a similar assessment 800 years ago when they encountered the Tirith. The Tirith were peaceful agrarians, seemingly defenseless. Within 5 years of the Zoraxian invasion, the Tirith had adapted Zoraxian technology to create weapons that the Zoraxians themselves had never conceived. The NIGMA Council members exchanged glances that clearly communicated their dismissal. "And where are these Tirith now?" asked Emperor Draz-Kor, his skin flushing a contemptuous orange. "They chose to abandon warfare after defeating the Zoraxians," Laxna replied. "They returned to their agrarian lifestyle." This prompted uproarious laughter from the NIGMA leaders. "A species that abandons power after achieving it," Draz-Kor mocked. "That alone proves their inferiority." Gortek froze the image on Draz-Kor's laughing face. The NIGMA proceeded to plan what they termed a simple conquest. A small fleet, just enough forces to establish dominance without wasting resources. After all, why commit significant forces to such an easy target? Gortek's mandibles clicked in a series of rapid movements that the translator didn't attempt to convert the alien equivalent of a derisive snort. their first and only mistake. They broadcast their invasion plans on what they thought were secure channels that, coincidentally, operated on frequency bands that humans were already using for their primitive radio astronomy. So before the NIGMA fired a single shot, humans knew they were coming. And humans, as the NIGMA would soon discover, do not appreciate uninvited guests. With conquest on their minds, Gore-Tex tapped his control pad again, and the holographic display shifted to show a small fleet of crescent-shaped NIGMA warships approaching Earth. The NIGMA sent what they called a pacification force, Gore-Tex explained, making air quotes with his upper appendages. 3 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 50 troop carriers. In NIGMA terms, this was practically a diplomatic mission. They expected Earth to surrender after the first demonstration of their weapons. The display showed the lead NIGMA cruiser positioning itself above North America, charging its main cannon. Admiral Tuzar decided to make an example of a small, uninhabited island off the western coast of the human nation-state called Canada. His plan was to vaporize it, then broadcast demands for Earth's surrender. Gore-Tex paused, his mandibles twitching in what those familiar with his species would recognize as barely suppressed glee. Unfortunately for the NIGMA, humans had this quaint concept called satellites. The footage showed dozens of small objects suddenly detaching from what had appeared to be debris in Earth orbit. While the NIGMA were preparing their dramatic entrance, humans were deploying what they later called orbital defense mines. Primitive by NIGMA standards, basically metal containers filled with explosives and ball bearings, but effective when teleported directly onto the hulls of NIGMA ships. The display showed sudden explosions across the NIGMA fleet. 3 destroyers immediately lost containment and exploded in brilliant purple flashes. The humans had taken commercial teleportation technology which the NIGMA had dismissed as too imprecise for military applications and turned it into a weapon. The NIGMA shields were calibrated to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles coming from outside. They never expected attacks to materialize inside their shield perimeters. The footage continued, showing NIGMA ships frantically trying to return fire at targets they couldn't properly track. The humans followed this with what they called Operation Trojan Horse. They loaded their own transport ships with nuclear devices and sent out distress signals. When NIGMA ships tractored them in, assuming they were capturing human civilians, Gore-Tex trailed off as the footage showed more NIGMA ships erupting in flames. The first wave of the NIGMA pacification force lost 40% of their ships before they managed to fire a single shot at Earth. The rest retreated to regroup near your planet's moon. The display shifted to show a NIGMA command center in disarray, with Admiral Tuzar barking orders at his subordinates, his head tentacles writhing in fury. "I want those primitive savages obliterated." The translation of Tuzar's rant bellowed through the memorial hall. "They caught us by surprise with their suicide tactics. Ready the second wave. Double the fleet size. No mercy." Gore-Tex froze the image. This was the moment when a smart species might have reconsidered their approach. The humans had demonstrated creativity, willingness to sacrifice, and an understanding of NIGMA technology that should have raised some serious questions. But to the NIGMA, it was inconceivable that they could actually lose to a lesser species. They assumed they had simply underestimated human desperation. The display switched to show a Confederation intelligence center, where a small, furry being with 6 eyes was frantically compiling data. "This is Brax, one of our top analytical minds," Gore-Tex said with genuine respect. Within hours of the first engagement, Brax had compiled a comprehensive report on human military capabilities based on their response to the NIGMA attack. His conclusion? I'll quote directly, "Humans appear to possess an unprecedented capacity for weaponizing anything at their disposal, combined with a remarkable absence of the psychological limitations that prevent most species from rapidly adapting to new threats." Gore-Tex sighed heavily. Brax sent this report to NIGMA High Command as a courtesy. They dismissed it as Confederation propaganda designed to demoralize our forces. Another missed opportunity to avoid annihilation. The display shifted again, this time showing a human military command center. At its center stood a striking woman with dark skin, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, intense focus evident in her eyes as she studied tactical displays. "This is Commander Amara Jackson of Earth's United Defense Force," Gore-Tex said. Before the NIGMA invasion, she had been a relatively obscure intelligence officer specializing in threat assessment. After the first NIGMA attack, she was rapidly promoted to lead what humans called Project Boomerang. The display showed Jackson addressing a room full of military and civilian personnel. "They came here thinking we'd be easy prey," Jackson was saying, her voice steady and determined. "They've shown us their technology, their tactics, and most importantly, their arrogance. Now we're going to use all three against them. The NIGMA believe they're hunting us. It's time to show them what happens when you corner an animal that's smarter than you are." Gore-Tex nodded appreciatively at the display. Within 48 Earth hours, Commander Jackson had assembled a counterintelligence team that began broadcasting false human military communications and creating holographic decoys of Earth defense installations, and most ingeniously, sending out unmanned ships broadcasting signals that mimic NIGMA distress calls. He clicked his mandibles in amusement. The NIGMA never bothered to change their communication protocols. They never imagined that humans would be able to crack them so quickly, let alone use them to set traps. As one human military historian later put it, the NIGMA brought a superior army to the battlefield, but forgot they were fighting a species that had perfected the art of dirty tricks. Gore-Tex pressed another control, and the holographic display showed a massive NIGMA armada emerging from hyperspace near Mars. The ships were larger, more numerous, and bristling with additional weapons systems. The NIGMA, true to form, decided that the appropriate response to their initial defeat was to simply add more ships, Gore-Tex said, rolling all 6 of his eyes simultaneously. As Admiral Tuzar so eloquently put it, if one hammer doesn't break the nail, use a bigger hammer. Such poetic military strategy. The display zoomed in on the NIGMA flagship, a massive dreadnought nearly 3 miles long with biomechanical appendages extending from its hull like tentacles. The second wave included the Emperor's Pride, Drazkor's personal warship, and the most advanced vessel in the NIGMA fleet. It carried experimental weapons that had never been used in actual combat, because no previous opponent had warranted their deployment. Gore-Tex's tone was dry as dust. The NIGMA were, at least, paying humans the compliment of bringing out their best toys to destroy them. The footage showed the NIGMA fleet taking up positions around Earth, this time maintaining greater distance and scanning vigilantly for hidden traps. The NIGMA had learned some lessons from their first defeat. They approached more cautiously, kept their shields at maximum, and dispersed their forces to prevent clustered targets. What they didn't anticipate was that humans had spent the intervening 2 weeks collecting debris from the destroyed NIGMA ships. The display split to show human facilities where scientists and engineers were working feverishly over dissected NIGMA technology. Human adaptability truly revealed itself during this phase, Gore-Tex continued. Most species, upon acquiring advanced alien technology, would spend months or years studying it before attempting to use it. Humans? They had NIGMA shield generators reverse-engineered and installed on their major cities within 10 days. The footage showed the distinctive purple shimmer of NIGMA shields suddenly appearing over New York, London, Beijing, and other major human population centers, just as the NIGMA fleet opened fire. The looks on the NIGMA commanders' faces when their bombardment harmlessly dissipated against their own shield technology? Gore-Tex's mandibles spread in the equivalent of a wide grin. Priceless. But humans weren't content with just defending. They had also been busy adapting NIGMA offensive technology. The display showed human fighter craft suddenly appearing from hidden bases, now equipped with smaller versions of NIGMA energy weapons. Human fighter craft had always been one of their military strengths, but they had been limited by range and firepower. with reverse-engineered NIGMA energy weapons. They became the nightmares that still haunt surviving NIGMA veterans to this day. The footage showed swarms of human fighters attacking NIGMA capital ships using hit-and-run tactics, focusing fire on vulnerable points that only someone intimately familiar with NIGMA ship design would know. This prompted the NIGMA to ask an important question: how did humans suddenly know exactly where to hit their ships for maximum damage? Gore-Tech paused dramatically. Enter Valkyr, the NIGMA's top infiltration specialist. The display showed a NIGMA officer who appeared almost human except for the faint purple hue to his skin and slightly elongated fingers. Through some form of biomodification, he had been altered to pass as human. Valkyr was surgically modified and extensively trained to infiltrate human command structures. He was inserted into the United Defense Force with forged credentials identifying him as Communications Specialist Mason Reed. His mission was to discover how humans were acquiring such detailed knowledge of NIGMA weaknesses and to sabotage their defense efforts from within. The footage shifted to show a stern-faced human woman with short gray hair and piercing blue eyes, studying surveillance footage with intense concentration. Unfortunately for Valkyr, he encountered Security Chief Eliza Powell. Before the war, Powell had been a legendary figure in human counterintelligence circles. Her colleagues called her the Bloodhound for her uncanny ability to sniff out infiltrators. The display showed Powell watching Valkyr from across a room, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. According to Powell's later reports, she became suspicious when Reed used Earth idioms with slight but noticeable inaccuracies. For instance, he once said "that's water under the road" instead of "that's water under the bridge." Laughter rippled through the memorial hall. Within 3 days of Valkyr's insertion, Powell had him in custody. What happened next demonstrates why humans are both terrifying and, occasionally, admirable. The footage showed Valkyr strapped to a chair in an interrogation room, with Powell calmly sitting across from him. Instead of executing Valkyr, as NIGMA protocol would have dictated for a captured spy, Powell offered him a choice: die immediately or become a double agent. The display showed Powell leaning forward, speaking intently to the captured spy. "You've seen what we're capable of," Powell was saying. "Your people started this war thinking we were primitive. Now they're dying by the thousands. Work with us, and you might be one of the few NIGMA who survive what's coming." Gore-Tech nodded appreciatively. Valkyr agreed, though whether from self-preservation or a growing realization that the NIGMA were on the losing side remains debated. What's undeniable is that he became one of the most valuable assets in human intelligence operations. The footage showed Valkyr sending coded transmissions to the NIGMA fleet, transmissions carefully crafted by Powell's team to contain just enough accurate information to maintain his cover, buried within misleading strategic advice. For the next 3 months, Valkyr fed the NIGMA leadership exactly what they wanted to hear: that humans were running out of resources, that their adaptations of NIGMA technology were flawed and unstable, that one final, massive push would break their resistance. The display shifted back to the NIGMA High Command chamber, where Emperor Draz Kor was addressing his generals, his skin glowing with confident green hues. "The primitives have put up an admirable fight," Draz Kor declared, "but our agent confirms they are at their breaking point. Their shield generators are failing. Their weapons are burning out. One more concentrated attack will end this annoying resistance. And Earth will take its rightful place as a footnote in the glorious history of NIGMA expansion." Gore-Tech froze the image on Draz Kor's smugly confident face. The NIGMA leadership, despite losing over 200 ships and nearly 50,000 troops, remained absolutely convinced of their eventual victory. Every setback was dismissed as a temporary anomaly. Every human advancement was explained away as a desperate last gasp. Even when presented with clear evidence that humans were not just adapting NIGMA technology but improving upon it, the Emperor and his advisors maintained their belief in NIGMA superiority. Gortek's voice took on a tone of mock solemnity. As a human philosopher once said, there are none so blind as those who will not see. The NIGMA leadership had built their entire civilization on the certainty of their own supremacy, accepting that humans might genuinely be their equals or worse. Their superiors in some respects was simply not possible within their worldview. And so they marched confidently toward their own extinction, eyes wide open but seeing nothing. Gortek's expression shifted as the holographic display changed to show a new set of tactical maps. Instead of Earth being surrounded by NIGMA ships, the display now showed human vessels appearing near NIGMA supply depots and transit routes dozens of light years from Earth. The turning point came approximately 5 months into the conflict, Gortek explained. While the NIGMA were focused on breaking Earth's defenses, Commander Jackson had been quietly assembling what humans called the Hornet Fleet, smaller, faster ships equipped with reverse-engineered NIGMA jump drives. The display showed sleek, dark vessels with minimal markings slipping past NIGMA sensor arrays. The NIGMA had established a complex supply chain to support their Earth invasion force. Fuel depots, ammunition factories, clone barracks all positioned strategically throughout neighboring systems. They were well defended against frontal assaults. But the NIGMA never anticipated humans would be able to reach them at all. The footage showed human ships suddenly appearing near a massive NIGMA fuel processing station. Commander Jackson's strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Why fight the NIGMA fleet directly when you could simply cut off their supplies? Human strike teams hit 17 critical NIGMA facilities simultaneously. They didn't try to capture them. They didn't try to occupy them. They just reduced them to floating debris. The display showed the fuel station erupting in a series of explosions, followed by similar scenes at other NIGMA facilities. But Jackson's true masterstroke was targeting the NIGMA subspace communication relays, Gortek continued, genuine admiration in his voice. The NIGMA Empire, like most interstellar civilizations, relied on a network of communication hubs to coordinate their forces across vast distances. Jackson's teams didn't destroy these relays, they hijacked them. The display showed human technicians installing devices on captured NIGMA communication nodes. Within 3 days, the humans controlled 80% of NIGMA battlefield communications. They could intercept orders, send false commands, or simply block transmissions entirely. NIGMA fleet commanders suddenly found themselves operating blind, unable to coordinate with each other or receive instructions from high command. The footage shifted to show Emperor Dre's Kor in his throne room, his skin now pulsating with angry red colors as he raged at his advisors. I want every available ship recalled to defend our core systems. The translation of Dre's Kor's orders boomed through the hall. I want our best scientists working on counters to human adaptations of our technology. I want defensive grids around every NIGMA world strengthened immediately. Gortek paused the footage. This was the first time Dre's Kor acknowledged humans as a genuine threat to the NIGMA Empire itself, rather than just an irritating obstacle to conquest. Unfortunately for him, it came approximately 4 months too late. The display shifted to show human shipyards, where vessels of unfamiliar design were under construction, hybrids of human and NIGMA technology that looked sleeker, but more efficient than either originating design. By this point, humans weren't just copying NIGMA technology, they were innovating beyond it. They had developed countermeasures to every NIGMA weapon system, improved the efficiency of NIGMA power generators by 30%, and created entirely new applications that the NIGMA had never conceived. Gortek flicked to a new image showing a Confederation diplomatic vessel approaching both human and NIGMA command ships. It was at this juncture that the Galactic Confederation attempted to broker peace. Our diplomatic corps could see where this conflict was heading, and we hoped to prevent further bloodshed. The display showed footage from the failed peace conference, with representatives from Earth sitting calmly on one side of a table, while NIGMA delegates glowered from the other. The human representative, Secretary Diane Torres, actually offered remarkably generous terms. Considering the circumstances, Gortek noted, Earth would cease all offensive operations if the NIGMA would withdraw from human space and recognize Earth's sovereignty. No reparations, no surrender of territory, just an end to hostilities. The footage showed the lead NIGMA negotiator rising from his seat, face contorted with rage. We will not be dictated terms by lesser beings who stumbled upon stolen technology. The NIGMA diplomat raged. The NIGMA empire has stood for 12,000 years. We will crush these upstart primitives and take what is rightfully ours. Gortek shook his head sadly. The human's response was considerably briefer. Secretary Torres simply said, "We tried." Remember that we tried. And with that, the last chance for peace vanished and the final phase of the conflict began. Gortek's demeanor grew more solemn as the holographic display shifted to show a massive fleet of human warships gathering near the edge of NIGMA-controlled space. These vessels bore little resemblance to Earth's original defensive fleet. They were larger, more sophisticated, with designs that clearly incorporated and improved upon NIGMA technology. 6 months after the NIGMA's initial attack on Earth, humans launched what they called Operation Reciprocity, Gortek said, emphasizing the last word with a click of his mandibles. A rather understated name for what was essentially the beginning of the end for a 12,000-year-old empire. The display showed the human fleet splitting into 5 distinct battle groups, each heading toward different sectors of NIGMA space. General Marcus Reyes, who had been a relatively obscure logistics officer before the war, emerged as the architect of humanity's final offensive. His approach was, in his own words, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. The footage shifted to show Reyes, a stocky man with a close-cropped salt and pepper beard and intense eyes, addressing his fleet commanders. The NIGMA came to Earth expecting us to bow down before their superior technology, Reyes was saying, his voice steady and controlled. They planned to strip our world bare and reduce us to slaves or corpses. Today, we bring the consequences of that decision to their doorstep. But we are not them. Our targets are military, only their fleets, their weapons facilities, their command centers. We are not here for vengeance or conquest. We are here to ensure that the NIGMA Empire never threatens another civilization again. Gortek nodded approvingly. Many in the Confederation were surprised by this restraint. Most species, upon gaining a decisive military advantage over an enemy that had attempted to annihilate them, would have responded with equal brutality. Humans, however, drew a distinction between the NIGMA leadership and the broader NIGMA population that would shape the aftermath of the conflict. The display shifted to show human battle groups engaging NIGMA defense fleets around several core worlds. The NIGMA still outnumbered humans nearly 20-1 in total ships, Gortek continued. But superior numbers proved meaningless against what humans had developed during those 6 months of desperate innovation. The footage showed human vessels deploying weapons that the assembled dignitaries immediately recognized as far beyond conventional NIGMA technology, gravitic distortion fields, and that crushed NIGMA ships like empty beverage containers, phase-shift torpedoes that bypassed shields entirely. And most devastatingly, something humans had dubbed neural dissonance projectors. The irony was exquisite, Gortek said with a dark chuckle. Remember Admiral Tuzar mocking humans for not having neural disruptors? Humans not only developed their own version. They improved the concept by creating devices that specifically targeted the unique frequency of NIGMA neural patterns. These weapons rendered NIGMA crews incapacitated but left their ships intact, allowing humans to capture hundreds of vessels without destroying them. The display showed NIGMA ships drifting powerless as human boarding parties took control. Within 2 weeks, humans had penetrated to within 3 systems of NIGMA Prime, the Empire's throne world. The NIGMA population, which had been fed a steady diet of propaganda about imminent victory, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy at their very doorstep. The footage shifted to show Emperor Draz Kor addressing his people, his skin now a sickly gray-green, the NIGMA color of fear. The Empire has stood for 12,000 years, and it will stand for 12,000 more. Draz Kor proclaimed, his voice betraying the desperation behind his words. Every NIGMA must now become a warrior. Every ship must join the defense fleet. We will drive these human vermin back to their pitiful world and crush them so thoroughly that the galaxy will forget they ever existed. Gortek paused the footage. Draz Kor gathered the largest fleet ever assembled in NIGMA history, over 20,000 vessels ranging from massive dreadnoughts to hastily armed civilian transports. He positioned this armada in a defensive formation around NIGMA Prime and waited for the humans to arrive. The display showed the immense NIGMA fleet orbiting their homeworld, a swirling mass of ships that blotted out the stars themselves. What Draz Kor failed to anticipate was that General Reyes had no intention of fighting that battle on NIGMA terms. While the Emperor's attention was fixed on the human fleet approaching from the front, Reyes had dispatched Commander Jackson with a smaller, stealthier force to approach from below the ecliptic plane. The footage showed human ships appearing suddenly behind and beneath the NIGMA defensive formation. Jackson's force wasn't there to attack the NIGMA fleet directly. Their target was something far more valuable: NIGMA Prime's planetary defense grid and orbital command stations. The display showed precision strikes taking out key nodes in the NIGMA defensive network, followed by targeted EMP pulses that disabled the command and control systems coordinating the massive NIGMA fleet. Within 30 minutes, the most powerful defense force ever assembled by the NIGMA Empire was reduced to a disorganized swarm of ships, unable to communicate effectively or coordinate their actions. It was at this moment that General Reyes delivered his ultimatum to Emperor Draz Kor. The footage showed Reyes's transmission being broadcast across all NIGMA channels. Your defenses have fallen. Your fleet is in disarray. Surrender now, and the NIGMA people will be spared. Continue this fight, and what happens next will be on your hands alone. The display shifted to show Draz Kor in his throne room, surrounded by his high command, his skin cycling through a rapid sequence of colors that reflected his emotional turmoil. I will never surrender to lesser beings. Draz Kor roared. The NIGMA Empire dies only when I do. Gortek's voice grew quieter. Draz Kor ordered his flagship to break formation and charge directly at the main human fleet. It was a suicide run, intended as a final, defiant gesture. What the Emperor didn't know was that his ship's command codes had already been compromised through Valkyr's intelligence network. The display showed Draz Kor's massive flagship suddenly veering off course, its weapons systems powering down as it drifted helplessly into the waiting custody of human forces. The Emperor was captured alive, along with most of his high command. Without leadership, the remaining NIGMA fleet fragmented. Some ships surrendered, others fled, a few fought to the bitter end. Within hours, NIGMA Prime was under human control. Gortek spread his appendages in a gesture of finality. What followed was not the brutal occupation many expected, but something far more devastating to the NIGMA identity. Humans systematically dismantled the core political and military structures of the NIGMA Empire while leaving civilian infrastructure largely intact. They didn't want to rule the NIGMA, they wanted to ensure the NIGMA could never threaten anyone again. The display showed the collapse of NIGMA authority spreading across their former territories like a wave. World after world declared independence from the empire that had controlled them for millennia. Within 3 weeks, the NIGMA Empire, once spanning 3 galactic quadrants, had effectively ceased to exist as a unified political entity. All that remained were scattered fragments, isolated worlds struggling to define themselves in a post-imperial reality. Gortek's voice took on a tone of wonder tinged with fear. From first contact to the fall of NIGMA Prime, 7 Earth months. Perhaps the most rapid collapse of a major galactic power in recorded history. And all because they couldn't conceive that a species they considered primitive might not just match their technology, but surpass it. The holographic display faded, returning to a simple rotating image of the former NIGMA homeworld. Admiral Gortek took a moment to sip from his hydration pod before addressing the gathered dignitaries once more. "And so we return to today," he said, gesturing around the memorial hall. 5 years since the fall of an empire that believed itself eternal. 5 years of adjusting to a galaxy where humans are no longer an obscure curiosity, but a central power in interstellar politics. Gortek's gaze fell specifically on the human ambassador, Nadia Yassir, who sat with perfect posture, her expression neutral, but somehow radiating quiet confidence. "I've often wondered what might have happened if the NIGMA had simply heeded our warnings," Gortek mused. "If they had approached Earth with offers of trade rather than conquest. If they had recognized the potential of humans as allies rather than subjects. The NIGMA had so much to offer the galaxy: art, medicine, philosophy developed over 12 millennia of civilization. All of it, sacrificed on the altar of their own hubris." He clicked his mandibles in a pattern that the translator rendered as a rueful chuckle. "Just last week, a newly contacted species, the Trilnik, asked me about the NIGMA incident during their orientation to Confederation protocols. The Trilnik ambassador wanted to know if it was true that humans had demolished a major galactic power in less than a standard year. When I confirmed this, he immediately requested that their first official diplomatic mission be sent to Earth." Laughter rippled through the audience. I believe his exact words were, "We would very much like to be friends with these humans. Very, very good friends." More laughter, louder this time. "The Trilnik are a wise species," Gortek continued, his tone becoming more serious. "They understand something that the NIGMA, for all their advanced technology and ancient wisdom, never grasped. Respect is not the same as fear. And superiority is not determined by age or technological development alone." Gortek raised his upper limbs in a formal gesture of respect toward the human delegation. "Humans have changed the fundamental calculus of galactic politics. They've introduced new technologies, new diplomatic approaches, and perhaps most significantly, new phrases into our interspecies lexicon." He clicked his mandibles in amusement. "My personal favorite emerged from the military academies on Juraxis Prime. Their first lesson in xenostrategic studies now begins with the instructor writing on the board, 'Never underestimate a species that evolved on a death world.'" Gortek's voice took on a more solemn tone. "It bears noting that despite their decisive victory, humans have not engaged in the kind of expansionism that many feared would follow. They've integrated into the Confederation, shared their innovations selectively, and focused primarily on securing their own borders rather than extending them. Whether this restraint springs from wisdom or simply a human preference for their home systems remains a subject of considerable debate among Confederation sociologists." He gestured once more to the rotating image of the former NIGMA homeworld. "Today we remember not just the fall of an empire, but the lesson their fall teaches us all. The NIGMA believed that their longevity made them invulnerable, that their technological head start made them unassailable, that their innate superiority was a simple fact of the universe, rather than a comforting fiction they told themselves." Gortek's many eyes surveyed the assembly one final time. "As we commemorate this anniversary, let us remember that the greatest threat to any civilization is not external enemies or technological inferiority. It is the conviction of its own exceptionalism, the belief that the rules that govern all others somehow do not apply to them. The NIGMA Empire stood for 12,000 years until it encountered something its paradigm could not accommodate, a species that refused to know its place." He raised his ceremonial glass in the traditional Confederation salute. "To the memory of the NIGMA, and to the lesson their end teaches us, in this vast galaxy, there is always someone stranger, more resourceful, and more dangerous than you can imagine. May we all have the wisdom to recognize them before we provoke them. And may we all have the humility the NIGMA lacked to extend a hand in friendship rather than a fist in conquest." As Gortek concluded his address, His gaze met Ambassador Yassir's across the hall. The human gave him a small, knowing smile and raised her own glass in return. In that moment, despite belonging to species separated by billions of years of evolution and unimaginable biological differences, they shared a perfectly understood truth. But the galaxy had changed forever, and those who could not adapt to that change would join the NIGMA in the footnotes of history. The universe, as always, remained utterly indifferent to who survived within it, but it did seem to favor those who understood that evolution never truly ends, and that today's apex predator is tomorrow's cautionary tale.